Being after time, Heidegger claims in Being and Time that time is the horizon upon which we are to come to encounter and understand the meaning of being, the horizon on which beings have meaning for us. Time is the horizon on which that very specific being, Dasein, or our singularity as human beings, comes to have meaning for us. Heidegger was, of course, a philosopher, and philosophers tend to think in terms of transcendental. In this chapter, I suggest that much can be gained in grasping Heidegger's thesis, not in terms of transcendental, but rather in terms of socio-cultural change. I suggest that we think of our identification of beings and the self on the horizon of time as something specific to modernity. I suggest that we ask on what temporal horizon did we constitute the meaning of being and ourselves before we did so on the modern horizon of time. I want especially to consider whether we still be encountering beings and ourselves on the horizon of time. I want to think about the possibility of an epoch of a temporal experience prior to that of time, which can be understood as tradition or better yet history, and I want to speculate about an epoch posterior to that of time, what might be called a temporal experience, not of time but of speed. In other words, I suggest that we might think about that what being may be like after time. I propose to interrogate how we might encounter being and the self in this new epoch of temporal experience. I want to raise the question of stories and novels is an essay consisting of fragments which are at the same time a series of proverbs that justifies principally of two types of the storyteller and his story on the one hand. If the story gives counsel through the communication of experience, the novel centers around the meaning of life. The short story hero, grounded in experience, is not concerned about the meaning of life. The story hero cannot get, and surely did not want, that sort of distance on life. Death in the novel lets the reader intuitively grasp the meaning of life. In that death is the end of temporality. In its closure, death imparts to the reader the meaning of life when the novel ends and the character dies. Thus, the novel imparts meaning through death as closure, while the story imparts meaning through death as continuity. The story works from a number of depths. Politics of difference. The age of the storyteller was the age of what Hannah Arendt called the politics and the meaning of being, and the human being was subordinated to the logic of the good life, to practice internal goods, virtues, and values woven into the fabric of forms of life. Time, in this sense, was woven to the grains of a set of embedded values, whereas political constitutions of modern states are based on a set of procedural rules within which individuals can pursue their own value of. Now, in the age of time, the age of Palestinian, in the age of the Proustian perplexity, the understanding, the Heidegger, the same, politics of difference, the meaning and its constituted will, the other, that is depth or time. The inside is constituted by the outside, presence by absence. Difference, instead, is the space between presence and absence, the third space between the same and the other, the space of decidability, of ambivalence, of the aphoria, of perplexity. The space of difference is a margin, a border, the chain of a mirror, a fold, that is. It is the place of difference, more primordial than either being or time, the space of difference, perplexity of ambivalence, but instead a temporality of What are you doing? Hello. Okay. This temporal experience no longer of time, but instead of speed of one which speak volumes of the contemporary cultural sensibility in films. Its difference exploded, and so is the political the space. I can't understand what happens to the meaning of being of both things and human beings in the age of speed. Where do we find the political? If in the age of storyteller the temporal horizon for the meaning of being was history, in the age of the novel the horizon for the meaning of being has been time, or more recently difference. But when the tale of the narrative are delegitimated, unlike Dyson, unlike existential subjectivity or the subjectivity of difference, but melancholic is basically passive. The politics of melancholy is the first of all of politics of limits. Dyson is supposedly a finite being. I don't know, these prototypes are very information-rich themselves. They are often intelligent machines or software. This intelligent project of information society come under the law of intellectual property. They come under the law of not yet property, but intellectual property. Real property is not about the present. Newsprint is also shot through with the factility of the particular, not just the relation to any universal, but also to any transcendental. It is the pure empirical with the disappearance of the transcendental. Poetry, art, and the novel, music opens a new window onto the universal. Not just the value, but the meaning is found in a certain futility. And in classical architecture, meaning and value are inscribed in memory, tradition, and an idealized past. In modern architecture, meaning is inscribed in the inscribed in the future. Modern architecture and built space are functioned for the future. Their value lies in what they are functional for. What they are functional for is what they are meant for. Indeed, in everyday language, meaning refers not only to deeper meaning, but to what something is meant for in a utilitarian sense. Modern built space can reduce meaning to utility. The modernity and function are frames that impart a certain meaning and ordering onto real things. But narrative and discourse are also such frames. The narrative structure of the novel, as distinct from the folk tale, is a frame that finds meaning in futility. It imparts order to not things, but events. So does the discursive logic of science, which is another mode of such framing. Here we see how there are two ways in which the generalists, the principle of information, can be surmounted. Information age we frame not primarily through commodity or function, nor through narrative or discourse. How indeed do we frame information? About the cited essay on Joyce can give us some clues here. The essay is about literature and newsprint, about the relationship between literature and newsprint. It begins with a quote from in which the poet attacks contemporaneous high culture's denigration of journalism, marvels at the time-space spread of the press and its instantaneity, and speculates of all literature will one day come under its spell. Point is that literature will need to move away from a mode in which it is the self-expression of a single subjectivity. His point is that literature will have to move out of this subjectivist internalization into a sort of externalization. On the model of the picturesque art, he considers observations on the press as a traffic epistemolization of enormous and elementary interests, the recital of diverse facts in the fact of this hubbub of appetites and protest, this confusion of tongues. What is the role of poet? Uses an orchestra and analog, the role of the poet, or the orchestration of the qualities of ordinary speech. It is to place, as it were, a poetic or novelistic frame on the fate diverse. The job of the artist is not to sign, but to read signatures. It is to, quote, to recapture significance from the least sonorities. It is not self-expression, but the release of the life in things. Breaks with the principle of the novelist. Here, the novel is the self-expression of the author's subjectivity. Its narrative is a life narrative, the being unto death of the protagonist. Joyce Ulysses is empirically not about such a being unto death. It takes place not along a protagonist's life narrative, but in a single way. It has value for as long as a newspaper. Epiphanies, his existential meaning happens in a decidedly epiphanic time-space. In Ulysses, in episode 7, I find ourselves in a newspaper office in the heart of the Hibernian metropolis. Indeed, the press was a microcosm of the world of a man, its columns unchanging monuments to the age-old passions and interests of all men, and its production and distribution of a drama involving the hands and organs of the entire body politic, with its dateline, June. Ulysses in newspaper-wise, an abridgment of all space in a brief segment of time. On this view, the novel is clearly a question of the orchestration of the ordinary voices. It is in fact an orchestration of the information. In the information society, the friend carries out orchestration of information. This orchestration will work spatially, architecturally. It is orchestrating a tactile space of information, a space that Lefebvre saw in terms of the gesture, and Melucan, the gesture as phatic communication. We no longer live in a culture of subjectivist distance. Culture has left its stead as representational and narrative to become, as Benjamin suspected, architectural. We live in the world with immaterial and material cultural objects. An increasing proportion of all the objects we live with, use, and interact with are cultural. An increasing portion of all the objects we live with, use, and interact with are cultural, or as culture has lost its temporality, losing first its past and then in the future in the immediacy of the event. In its immediacy of real time, it has become spatial. It has become architectural. So what happens with the chaos information type 2 is reworking through the plans of immanence by architectural. What happens is a reworking of the junk. Of the ubiquity of the information through the plans of an architectonic. How? Now culture is an amongst all us rather than somehow inside us, and all amongst us. Culture is all amongst us rather than somehow inside us or above us. Now culture is no longer in representations but in objects, the brains and the technologies of the information society. It lends itself much more to framing by an architectonic, no longer narrative, even primarily musical, having little to do with either Renaissance perspective or the flatness of Picasso's picture plan. Culture is now three-dimensional, spatial, as much tactile as visual or textual, all around us and inhabited, lived in rather than encountered in a separate realm as a representation. We need to put various sorts of order on the new anarchic complexity. Thus, we need frames to order the information to make it, as Mallarmé said, intelligible. Frames also make the information marketable. One such type of frame is the law of intellectual property. Frames keep other people out, and frame is the law of intellectual property. Frames keep other people out and let the public know that the information inside the frame is your information. Okay. What is friend is a rule of information. Another such friend is the brand. At the older manufacturing capitalism, so to speak, in friend itself, its accumulation already had a certain order. In an information society, the frames must be imposed from the inside. Exchange value is empty, yet modern law of property and contract circumscribed it. The means of production, yet as abstract capital, were owned by the capitalist, and the property law meant he could keep others out, and he also be also de facto owner of labor power of variable capital. But this was in industrial capitalism. In information capitalism, the friend is the brand. The brand has its basis in intellectual property. Garbage. We are arriving in an age in which flows of goods are paralyzed by flows of bads. How are we to govern those flows of bads? So that is garbage. The side effect of the industrial society are material bads, physical pollutant. The side effects of the information society is a symbolic bads, mental pollutants. We are polluted with the waste product of the information society, the sort of things that cultured people do not want in their living rooms. In their front doors are found weighty volumes, poetry, painting, and all sculpture that will endure in ages, and long-duration furniture. You can add long-duration vinyl LPs, the television, the Walkman, the video cassettes, audio tapes, CDs, computer games, and net-connected computers are banished to other rooms further back. Long in its front of house, cultural background information as garbage is worse than valueless. This symbol space, this symbolic garbage leaves you no psychological space. Hence, junk fax and junk email. Junk email. Information comes to you. You don't go to the information. You need to go out and buy a book. You need to go out of the junk fax and junk mail and buy a book. That is now I am reading a book, or take it out of the library, to go to the cinema and go out and buy or the video shop. In this sense, TV movies are like information. Information comes to you sometimes when it is summoned, sometimes not. So we are in a garbage age, that of information. Information comes to you. Junk is of different order than garbage. In its way, junk preserves value. Junk piles and rubbish piles are of different order. So in our mind, there are full of junks in our brain that makes our become racism, become hate. Spoke of profound illumination as coming through the disused objects of capitalism. Yesterday's justice, cast off things, ruins, are not as so different from yesterday's information. Yes, you can cast out, desert these things, but you can't desert yesterday's information because they are in your mind now. The ephemerality of yesterday's goods and information is similar to the experience of the prostitute or the other figures of Benjamin's cityscape. This is ephemeral, thrown away experience. It is experienced as neither experience as traditional practice nor subjective experience, but it is a shock experience in the manufacturing society. Rational production resulted in a rational accumulation of friends. So I have read so many rubbish into my mind. How could I cast them out? I have to read a book. This talked about Nietzsche's. I thought that Benjamin's reaction to this may be less one of the critic man of affirmation of what Nietzsche called. Given this destruction of transcendence, he is still able to redeem a certain measure of existential meaning. He embraces our information fate, while at the same time looking backwards through the fragments. We embrace our information fate. Because this is our fate. We are influxed. This garbage information just come to us. This is our fate. But at the same time, looking backwards through the fragments, the frames are destroyed, leaving only the information fragments. Yet we are to look backwards through their prism, through their garbage. The disused information are all its forms. Here we see the ruins of ancient through the prism of the hypermodern. The fragmented identity of Benjamin's melancholic is better than no identity. Oh, is better than no identity. We are influxed. We are pushed so much in by garbage. Then melancholy. This is achieved through looking backwards while being jacked into the future's generalized indifference. So much so we become indifference. Here, the frame is destroyed through the event, is reached through the epiphanic conclusions of this page. I think I'm very interested. The first part of this chapter is about information. If one were to find one notion that lay at core, that was the essence, the phenomenal sense of the ongoing contradiction of information, disinformation, it would be the idea. The idea are at the core of all this. Here, the very materiality of capitalism has led to the denomination of its opposite, the idea. Here, the process of accumulation leads to its opposite, the impossibility of accumulation and the predominance of circulation. And the networks and the dispersion of all accumulations. Thus, in the new economy, circulation and the movement of finance capital are decoupled from the accumulations process. Things don't accumulate in internet, in networks. They accumulate in reverses, in heaps, in reserves. Things circulate in network, but the core is the idea, the contradictory essence of the idea, yet a further contradiction because in the information order there is no essences. May best have been grasped by Dump, of course, is the father of a conceptual art. The idea of the concept in conceptual art is not the concept as universal that subsumes the particular. It is also not the concept as transcendental. Hegel, it is more the concept or idea as immanent. Indeed, conceptual art with a capital C and a capital A at the end of the 1960s was explicitly informational, explicitly macro in inspiration. In conceptual art, since the idea has become the particular in a world without universal and without transcendental. Idea is not about any sort of dumping down or information overload per se. It's about intelligence. It is about artists no longer working through the aesthetic materials, color, or facet planet. It is instead about artists working aesthetically through an assemblage of materials. So in the past, the artists work on the colors, facets, on the painting. Now about architecture, about real material things. Now artists work on the immaterial things. I think mostly on softwares. That is ideas. Okay, Duchamp was the champion of intelligence. He hated the idea of he worked through treatises in mathematics and engineering in his day job at BRASC. This information society is shot through with intelligence. So in this age of so many garbage creation in the internet, we need idea and intelligence. Technology, technological phenomenology. What kind of culture is the information culture? More specifically, in what sense is the information order a technological culture? This chapter will address the problem through an attempt to outline what amounts to a shift from a culture of representation and representation culture. I want to explore the dimension of such an immanent culture. I shall turn towards the problem. Play agnostic versus representation. Homo sapiens. Representational culture speaks the language of correspondence. Without representation, metaphor has no sense. Play's magical language is metonymic, not metaphoric. There is no symbolic correspondence between the man and the kangaroo. Okay, there's no symbolic correspondence. So what is the difference between man and kangaroo? Instead, the man becomes the kangaroo, hence the significance of the metonymic mask in play. Metaphor in the metonymic, okay, man can play a kangaroo. Metaphor works through representation, metonymy through substitution. Play contest. Play emerges come into context is the first, the original translation of nature into culture. Okay, nature into culture. Play comes to in necessity but is not a voluntary activity. In play, man is not the hunter, not reduced to barbarism or pure economic gain. Play emerges, indeed constitute the general economy of access. For philosophical anthropology, man is the incomplete animal. Humans suffer from under a determination by instinct. We compensate for this intellectual poverty by completing ourselves as animals through institution, through culture. Hence, speak of religion as a sacred canopy. Play, however, prior to religion, is a sort of profane canopy. So play is very important. Play sets up rules that are freely accepted, yet abiding for children and societies. Yes, I think I would suggest the children in school to have play. For societies, their rules have duration. They outlast the brutish short life of man, the hunter. Play may ritually cause fertility and a good harvest, but it is not working in the harvest. It's not planting or sowing. Play as access is not part of economic reproduction, whether capitalist nor Gardner see play as a basic for art and culture. His model is child's play. Agon, the contest, the Agon is represented in China millennia before Christ, but of crucial significance may be the 6th century ABC Greeks and their contest of strength, wisdom, and wealth. The Agon is disinterested. It is without there are so many German languages. I think this book is written by a Germany, so I think Germany people might be very thoughtful people. Play modern work is accompanied by tension and joy. It is much more intense and in this sense much more interested. There is modern work it is much more intense. In play you can have a very intense emotions. To representation, the rationalization of play of the organ brings to the fore the question of judgment, whether legal judgment, cognitive judgment, moral or aesthetic judgment. Pivotal here is the application of a universal to a particular. For Kant, cognitive judgment takes place in the sphere of necessity. Moral judgment is a sphere of freedom. Aesthetic judgment. Cognitive judgment is necessity. Moral judgment, freedom. Moral is freedom. Aesthetic judgment concerns with the nature. Okay. So the natural beauty is natural, natural is beauty. The decline of civilization witnesses the rise of individualism and egoism and the inward structure of instinct. In this sense, the adventurers and gambler would accompany the rise of Western civilization, well as the risk society's inward structure. The idea of civilization could be important. What are the implications in terms of civilization, technical society, culture for the global information order? Husserl, founder of phenomenon, wrote of judgment on the one hand, of experience on the other. Judgment from the representation culture presumes a judger in a separate world from the judged. It presumes the judger has no instinct, has no intent. With respect to the judged, in phenomenological experience replaces the experience is endowed with intent, is very much in the same world with the experienced. In technological world and global information order are profoundly phenomenological. It is to this what we will now turn. The global information society and the nonlinear civilization order accompanying it connects to not representational culture but a technological culture. Okay, the global information society not connected to representational culture but to technology culture. Yes, that is when we make YouTube videos, we just tackle with the software, the apps, the software applications and the cameras, but we don't pay too much attention to the representation culture. The paradigm of play is central to this technological culture. Yeah, when you want to play, you make a play in the theater. There are so many the technologies on the stage to be used. This is phenomenology. Founder of phenomenology wrote of judgment on the one hand. So they are going to this technological culture and global information order are profoundly phenomenological. So they are going to talking about technology. In the previous, they're talking about culture. But information is more about technology. For Kant, the moral order within was an awesome mystery. For sociologists, the moral order without is a technical mystery. Technical mystery. By sociology here meant ethnomethodology, phenomenology more generally. All of this presume that the knowing subject has no intentionality towards the objects in the world. All of this presume that the knowing object has no intention towards the objects in the world. They presume he or she has a neutral, scientific, objective instance. They presume a knowing subject that has no attitude. At the heart of the phenomenal revolution against the subject-oriented object thinking against the positivism of the representation culture is a notion of intentionality, means that the subject is already in the world with the object. It means that there is no disembodied subject, that there is no objective observer. There's no objective observer. Do you think so? Everyone has an angle. Everyone has a prism. Husserl's transcendental reduction itself takes place from a particular intentionality, from an attitude that he calls the reflective attitude. This is not at all the scientific attitude. The scientific attitude itself is bracketed in the reflective attitude. Description from the point of view is a phenomenological reduction, does not yield knowledge in the sense of Kant's prior to the logical categories of the understanding, but will yield apodictic knowledge, categorical, privileged the intellectual. They presume the dualism of intellection on the other hand, and intuition on the other hand. For Kant, intuition on our everyday vulgar living in the world with objects yields no meaningful knowledge at all. Okay, our vulgar living leaves no meaningful knowledge at all. Do you think so? If we just live every day, it no meaningful at all. It is our vulgar living. So we have to watch the videos, read the books, right? If you watch videos, that is garbage information take in, and if you read the books, that is meaningful. Okay, and we go to the theaters. That's cultural life. Otherwise, we are vulgar living, no meaningful at all. Meaningful knowledge was the sort gained in the mathematical and the physics. I can't be mathematical and physics, so every day we should do some maths problems, can do some calculation and do some physics, maybe to build some structures, build some statues. Transcendental reduction was instead a matter of the intuition of essence. From other attitudes, things were known trivially in regard to their appearances. Yes, when we see other people, we see their appearances, but we don't see what's inside, right? Though not the sort of systematic appearance knowledge involved in maths and physics, there was thus the intuition of appearance from other attitude. Only the reflective attitude, so it's not the appearance, you have to reflection, will yield the intuition of the essences. The reflective attitude gives knowledge of what Kant deemed as unknowable, that is, things in themselves. The scientific attitude gives itself off as timeless and spaceless. The reflective attitude, for its part, is an attitude, a mode of experience that works over and through the time and space of experienced consciousness. So just as said, a life without a reflection is not worth living, is it? Against ontology towards radical empiricism, now it is comes unstruck. I can't believe so many people are watching now. Now this is the phenomenon. Phenomenon comes unstuck. This is classical phenomenon, whether life world or transcendental, comes unstuck, at least in terms of its suitability for the global information society. The information society's technological culture works through the erasing of transcendental. The global information society has an immanentist culture, fully a one and flat world culture. As such, its regime of culture is radically empiricist. For its part, phenomenologist starts with a theory of immanence, of our intentionality in the world with objects, and winds up, gives up a new two-word theory of ontological structure. It gives us a theory of structures of what is not an empirically occurring consciousness. Two particular phenomenologists differ here. They give us a slowly empirical phenomenology that dispenses with the reflective attitude and transcendental reduction. For them, any reduction will have to be an empirical one, an actually occurring one. Second, they dispense with an ontological structure of objects. An empirical phenomenon of communications. The correspondence is from a matching operation of a schema and an object. Here, an empirical construct, abstract feature from the concrete object as an ideal type. This is at best approximation of the concrete object. Is at the end a merely empirically possible object. It is but a nominalist designation that stands outside of fluctuations of circumstances and perspective appearances. In the congruence theory of reality that draws from the way in which something is of interest to a witness is all of the way in which that thing is real. In other words, the attitude associated with a form of life is inseparable from the object. Indeed, fitting is not a matching, but a constitutive operation. What is saying here is that the how and the what are inseparable. Knowledge does not so much tell you about the abstract from the real object, but the empirical construct stands for the specification, which in concrete object. The object is thus very real. As a schema of interest-relevant speculations, object has organizational properties in a sort of relevant structure of objects. What is alluding to is not a simple constructivism in which an object constructs an object. There must instead be the presence of an object in order for an attitude to be possible. So all this part, you just need to read this word, this sentence, then you know all of it. It's just if you are if you want to take part in this culture, you must believe that this thing is true. Just like if you watch my videos, then you must believe that I am the person who is not lying to you, right? This is most important. So they are always talk a lot of nonsense. So you can just skip it. Most important is temporality. In fact, it is temporal ordering that is Geffroy's preoccupation in studies of written in the problem of social order is the question of the ongoing nature of activities. Ongoing nature of activities. So it is not only real but also real time. The problem of social order is a question of the idea of activity is distinct from the act assumes an ongoing temporality, as does the of course reproduction. After his PhD, it is no longer the problem of Hobbes or the social system that concern, but instead localized settings like a suicide prevention center. The answer is accounting practices members carry out in regard to one another. The accounting practices that are inculcate, that are irreflexibly activity to a given setting. He focuses on the how of conversation, on, for example, turn taking. His interest is on how every expression in a conversation is tied to an implicit giving of an account that is analytically separate from that expression. What makes a conversation possible? That is a temporal problem. A conversation possible, that's a temporal problem. So maybe I want to have a conversation with you now, but not when I was sleeping, when I was much younger. When I was much younger, I don't want to have conversation, I just want to play. So account giving gives a conversation becomes a temporary extended activity. The duration of conversation is just one instance of the duration of social order in general. So conversation is just a conversation. It's just conversation is just a kind of social order. If something is doing wrong, let's have a conversation. Let's have a talk. The span of object for the scientific attitude is only maintained if each successive step turns out to according to the requirements of verification. The phenomenological act. The span of a project for the scientific attitude is only maintained if every successive step turns up according to the requirements of verification. The phenomenological actor, for its part, maintains the temporal span of the even in the face of experimental frustration. In order that the project may be maintained, there must be certain closedness of possibilities in the world. This is again fully opposite to the systematic doubt of the scientific attitude, whose guiding principle is openness to all possibilities. All possibility, always suspicious. Finally, in the natural attitude, we act with respect to some. Time of occurrence is not important for scientific data, yet is the utmost importance. A sex change operation must be managed across a whole series of activities. Growing older must be managed. Appearances must be managed in one way or another with regard to temporal consequences. He wants instead cognitively to order the world, meaning ascribing to the acts of the act must then taken into account not just the now but the past and the future, must taken into pretension and retention. This is in stark contrast to the observer. You are not an observer, you are a take-parter. This has tried to come to grips with the shift from the representational to technological culture in the information society. First through considerable try to come to grips with the shift from representational to technological culture in the information society. First, through considerations of the notion of play, technological culture is, as has been stressed throughout this book, not a dualist but an immanentist order. It presumes a certain hands-onness, a tactility, in contrast to the distinction to the principles of vision representation culture. The play will often play in fields, a concept that phenomena used to understand experiencing subjectivity. This chapter has understood technological culture as phenomenal. Reflection happens in time out from ongoing activities. Such a machine-mediated communication is the subject of the next chapter. So is the information order's new paradigm, power. This idea of knowledge through intuition makes the phenomenology in its germ already part of a technological culture. Now we come to the last chapter, nonlinearity, nonlinear power. Once media became the extension of man, as Marshall Lukewan intones, they no longer are primarily representation of man. Media as extensions become technologies. The technologies at stake are not the means of production, but the means of communication. This includes the movement of symbols among with people that we can understand as transport. Yes, teachers are knowledge transport. When you need technologies of communication only when communication takes place at a distance, yes? In an earlier age, when the media were primarily representational, we connected to the media in relations of either domination or resistance. In the present age, when media becomes technological, we engage with media, we work with them. Technology becomes something that enters integrally into our forms of life. Integrally, yeah, technology is everywhere. So media is an extension of our life. We use technology to have extension of our life. And Aristotle man was zoom politician for a member of the human in differential specifica was the rational animal. From the 19th century, we have Homo sapien, and in the early 20th century, man as a symbol using animal. The question becomes, how are technologies in extension of man insofar as man communicates? Here addresses two main subjects of technologies. First, those that are extensions of the human sense organs, and second, those that are extensions of other organs. Okay, human sense organs, human other organs, maybe humans' fingers. Communications, whether through the movement of message or movement of the body. There are implications for powers of this. There is a bureaucratic and national centralization of power with the phonetic alphabet and the road of that is broken up into plurality and of horizontally connecting yet global village with the newer discontinuity of airports. The supplement, not the representation, is at issue as we move from the mechanical age in linearity to information age discontinuity. As at issue, as in play and the game, is the elsewhere extension of the situation. In the media, we see this change in the declining proportion of classical narratives and the increasing centrality of football and sport. The compression of narrative from citizen to communicant. What is mosaic? According to Petit Robot, a mosaic is, consider for example, a classical mosaic of Pompeii and Ravenna, a decorative assemblage. It is originally a combination of small pieces of stone, glass, marble, and clay cemented together to make up a sort of design. The roots are from late Latin and shelled, not with mosaics, but with museum. Mosaics are constructed not by authors or genius painters, but craftsmen. So mosaic is no big deal. They are craftsmen's skill, who were juxtaposing stones. Here, hence, we can speak of wall and pavement mosaics, of mosaic rocks and leather mosaics. The mosaic is mother of virtue. Virtue is most importantly the stained glass windows of the churches, but also in department stores we see objects through virtues. The church mosaic presents sequential events in simultaneity and hence is difficult to read for the modern observer. Mosaic in any sense work will not the light on but the light through. Principle of the electronic media, impulses have a light through character, while there is something static about light on. The viewer does not receive impulses from it, but instead images. Impulses are one word. New networked phenomenon. They are on a basis of community. Indeed, imagine the community's stained glass window featured as constructive of community before the imaged communities of print media and nation building. Imagine the communities are formed in the print age. Contemporary electronic communities break with every part of action. Crucial in this context is in-depth involvement. Further, archaeologists would see as the richest and most faithful daily reflections that any society ever made of its entire range of activity. This is very, very ironic advertisement that is going to brainwash you becomes the richest, most faithfully daily reflections. You said you are consumers, but you are consumed. This is also seen in the phenomenon of the star. As narrative, cinema is linear. In the star phenomenon, principle gives way to graphic principle. The star is graphically embodied as an icon. The icon incorporates community in a sense that individualistic, linear narrative never can. Icon grew especially out of Eastern Church. There were engravings and paintings of saints on woodcuts. They came from the Byzantine age, whose rulers, opposing excuses of priestly power, were indeed the first iconoclast. The icon for McLuhan is not a specialist fragment, but all unified and complex. The television viewer is a screen. He is bombarded with light impulses. The television image, and increasingly forming tattoo. From expansion to implosion. Reading of history is focused on on reversal and implosion of expansion are followed by millennia of slow explosion of expansion are followed by the all of a sudden implosion of electronic media of the second half of the 20th century. There is a spatial, temporal, social, and seismic expansion through differential followed by this implosion. This implosion, this compression is at the same time a reversibility. Beginning, we were Normans, and we were once again Normans in the Middle Age. We are Normans in the Middle Age. The linearity of expansion starts with the displacement of Normans by sedentary culture. But I think Normans, we are not Normans at all. I think when we are in a linearity of expansion, I am always jumping, just like every people, just have education very linearly, first grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, but some genius would just jump some grades. Reversal after so many centuries of expansion comes with exhaustion, with saturation, played outness, with overheating. This overheating comes partly from speed up. Only with the telegraph notes did the message begin to travel faster than the messenger does. The wheel is an accelerator in the progression from pack animal to sledge to wheeled carriage and chariot. Curiously, this land, German as well as French, has seen power as basically linear. Critical theorists, whether from Frankfurt or Paris, situate themselves in a non-linear space from which they launch their critique of linearity. Yes, you go non-linear, then you can critique their linearity because you are in different dimension, right? You are more smart than those linear people. Towards a new regime of knowledge power. Donald. What are the figures of techno-science? They are the seed, chip, and gene, the fetus, the database, ecosystem. What are the figures of techno-science? Figures of science, such as the cell, are natural categories. The figures of techno-science are fusion of natural and artificial. The book at issue. First, there is a shift from the understanding of neutrality as contingent and social to its understanding as objective. From neutrality to objective. Because neutrality means things like, oh, you don't have any idea, means things that you are an idiot. But objective things that you are reasonable. But they are the same, right? Second, the witness have previously been human, and now it was a thing. Wow, I don't understand why the witness now is a thing. Compare those proud witnesses of the, okay, now is previously been as human because you choose to be neutrality when two people fight each other, or you choose to be neutrality, don't have emotions to it. Then now you become a thing. Yeah, you try to be objective, and now you become a thing. So it's worse. Compare these proud witnesses of the emergence of science with Haraway's modest witness. Her mutated modest witnesses establish truth in a regime of not science, but of techno-science. Techno-science. So scientists are not humans now, they are things. The problem, however, is that the external place of reflection and critique tend to disappear. The role of the witness, but is not to represent the knowledge, but to articulate the cluster or process, objects, and figures and marks. It is through the articulation to modify the boundaries. We, as modest witnesses, articulate and connect to the techno-scientific information order. Not for a political space, but as an articulation. We articulate. We occupy not a critical space of separate ontological substance, but instead one more supplement, connected by one more articulation, one more end, one more conjunction, and to the global techno-scientific information networks, linking to other laboratories, to other studios, and to other sites. We thus participate in techno-scientific lines of flight. We participate in the most casual but consequential logic of and the end of the discontinuous, non-linear, and halfway disembodied networks in the experimental way of life is mutual, away from the systematic doubt of pure science of the classical laboratories, and towards the sort of natural attitude of bracketing of forms of life. These are hybrid spaces of doubt and the bracketing of doubt, where truth and profit are fused. Patent and copyright are vastly different from ordinary property. They both concern intellectual property. In normal property rights, we invest labor in a good. In patent and copyright, we invest intellectual labor in a prototype. The decisive property right in manufacturing society is property in the means of production. The decisive property right in the information society is connected to the means of design in laboratories and studios. Laboratories right in real property in the means of production are rights to exploit workers in a typical power relation. Rights in intellectual are right to exclude others from valorizing that object. After patents and a third main category of intellectual property rights concerns trademarks. Haraway is interested in patent. She is especially interested in how life becomes patented. She is interested in She is interested in how living beings get patented to becoming proprietary forms of life, to become proprietary beings. Her above-mentioned warm homes onto the techno-cultural world. The chip gene database on fetus are in most cases proprietary beings, whether copyrighted, patented, or trademarked. Her hero is the oncomorph, which is first patented and then trademarked. There was an initial extension of patent law to some living organisms in the U.S. Plant Patent Act of 1930s. We are all patented. Everything is patented. Struggles over property in technological forms of life brings to central stage the question of platforms. Discourse on forms of life, whether in biology or philosophy, and corresponding roughly to the birth of society. Biology as a technological system. A genome is the totality of genetic information in an organism. There is a frog genome, a mouse genome. Just see the conclusion. We then are irrevocable part and parcel of technological forms of life. Technological forms of life involve culture at a distance and reproduction at a distance. All at a distance. Technological forms of life are non-linear. They are discontinuous. They are networks. They are possessed with neither the organicism nor the holism of more traditional forms of life. Their networks always leave open the possibility of another link, leave open the possibility of a supplement. Technological forms of life can be more or less systematic. System structures don't reproduce. Systems do. Networks can be more or less reproductive. They are at the same time more or less open to not the reproduction, but the production of society and of culture through the addition of another supplement. There is always a dangling construction. Platforms and standards are conditions of entry into technological forms of life. Genetic databases are potentially such platforms. Technological forms of life are through information. And this critique of information lies in the power of the end, in the power of the supplement of the to reconstitute the boundaries and reconfigure the object. The critique of information lies in the supplement that can make its modest contribution to reconfiguring such material, human, biological, and social forms of life. The modest witness is too modest to be the judge of earlier critical theory. She can only be fitness. The modest witness occupies either the sphere of freedom of the judge, nor the sphere of necessity of the judged. She can only occupy the space of the end. In an age of technological forms of life, the critic of information is the supplement. So when the information comes out, someone criticizes it. It's just a supplement. The information itself is the most important. No one cares about the critic of the information. The modest witness occupies neither the sphere of the freedom, because it occupies the modest witness neither occupies the sphere of freedom of the judge, nor the sphere of the necessity of the judge. So the modest witness means nothing. You are just a supplement. If you don't have an idea, you are nothing. You criticize, nothing. You are. Conclusions. This is the true conclusions. Conclusions. Communication, code, and the crisis of reproduction. This is a book. This book, Critic of Information. This is the conclusion of this book. This is a very hard book. Scott is a creative director of the studios. It carried out the first web broadcast of a pop festival, the Phoenix Festival, in 1993. The company has worked closely with the design and record industry. They have made enhanced CDs for a number of pop star clients. They have worked on advertising and marketing initiatives. They have designed business to consumer software. For Scott, content is the stuff that's sent down the pipes. Okay, so this company is so experienced. So just they have built a pipe of information flow, and the content is just the stuff sent to the pipes. It is the images, sound, text, narratives, video, streaming, animation, discourse, enhancement design, and then everything. And the code is the operationality. So it become industrialized. The cultural has been cultural industrialization. Communication is perhaps the most fundamental of all of our three terms. First generation, or our three terms, theories of information, spoke simply of an information society, presumably primary on a national level. Contemporary. So the first stage is the Shannon theory, Shannon information theory, just like one information, another information. The information shouldn't more different, so that this will be more information. Second generation theorists speak of information and globalization as one and the same thing. Okay, so in the second stage, the information has to be spread out, then it is information. If the information is just stay at the local, then it is not information. What is that connects to these truths? It is a communication. Communication allows information to have global stretch. Information. So when information just stayed at its own place, it is not information. When it spread out, it becomes information because it will have influence. The communication is a connecting link between the information and the globe. In a sense of communication and not information should perhaps be our basic unit of analysis. First generation ICT development was fundamentally informational. The key sectors were semiconductors, software, and computers. The second generation, however, is of the new economy of communicational, hence the centrality of the internet, of the net sector, hence SQL's systems which make roots. So the first generation of information is PC. The second generation of information is internet. Microsoft, hence content in communication as important as code, unlike the code-based. So in the first generation information, most important is how big your disk is. And the second generation of information is how fast your broadband is. I didn't see where is the third generation. The second, I have seen the second. Semi-rural Silicon Valley. Where is the third? I didn't see the third. Bad book. In multimedia was the phenomenon of the mid-19th century. The late 90s and the beginning of the present millennium saw the development of the new medium. Indeed, multimedia firms often in their lifetimes have transformed to new medium firms. The first generation of information theory society gave us the major information firms. The generation of Intel, Microsoft, and IBM. So Intel is going to die. Microsoft is still there. IBM is going to die. The second generation has produced the major communication firms, the growth of net sectors, like SQL, Oracle. Okay, SQL is going to beat by Huawei. Oracle, AOL, Netscape, die. Yahoo, die. These firms provide an infrastructure, a communication infrastructure for the internet, more significant in terms. The new economy is thus a communication economy. It is an economy. So this book is quite old, right? Because this company all died. Well, it's the third generation. What happens in the global information order? Global information order. What is the old monopolistic, bureaucratic, hierarchical form that integrated everything within the walls of the corporation, now subcontracts and outsourcing all of these outer costs. At the same time, a lot of work is outsourced. Against reproduction. What is accumulation? Things accumulate in piles, in heaps. But what is accumulation of information? The idea of social reproduction and of social as organism is the driving concept of sociology, as originally and most forcibly conceived by philosophy. Paints its gray on gray. Only a very long time after the emergence of and consolidation of a given ordering of human affairs. Thus, the sort of theory of flows and communications, the sort of meteorology to which this book is a contribution, comes a great number of decades. Indeed, nearly a century after the first emergence of some sort of communication order. The same is true of the notion of the social emerging over a century after the fall of and the predominance of the characteristic institutions, structures, organizations, and systems. And this author is very good at his language. When he says something, she always says things in so many systems, institutions, structures, organizations, systems. Idea of the social was comprised of the fact of social facts. So many words is too long. What is interesting is here that the social institutions of manufacturing capitalism arise not so much from the struggle of aristocrats and bourgeoisie. They arise instead alongside and in the excess of the relationship of the ancient regime. Hard suggests that it is not suggest struggle or contradictions inside any given order that leads to a new order, but escape or movement out of the earlier order. The same seems to happen in the transition from the social and the manufacturing order to the age of global information flows. The logic of laws is a question of the general economy. If the conscious collective, the symbolic order is about reproduction, then what indeed is an excess of a conscious collective? The symbolic order is about reproduction, then what indeed is the excess of a society? It is value. Wants us to separate fact from value, to separate social fact from more cultural, spiritual value. This also is so good at written English. To value, but she will say cultural, spiritual hermeneutic. The value. This is, of course, the current distinction between pure reason and practical reason. Pure reason is on the inside, alongside the knowledgeable, social, and understandable according to the laws of nature and mathematics. In contradiction, practical reason, ethics, freedom, God, the things in itself, affinity, is on the inside. It is being, where the sphere of freedom and intimate meaning is in excess. Away. From meaning to operate, from conceptual art as critical of information. If art is unfinished, it is at the same time accidental. Art, genre. This is complexity. There is a solidification first into object and subsequently into subject. Last words. Art must become conceptual. In order for this to happen, art must leave its specific difference to partake in a more general indifference. Taken inside the museum, urinal became suddenly reflective. Glossing the figure of the urinal with the discourse of art redoubled this. Formalist art is perhaps self-referential. Conceptual art is reflective. It is critical. It is a reflective critic of its own conditions of existence. It stands art as a conceptual critic to the power relations of the institution. The book has tried to begin to extend this sort of reflexive critique more generally to the global information and communications order. Here, the most orderly rational formulations and designs lead to the more irrational of consequences. Yet, the information society is not irrational. It is highly rational and irrational at the same time. Yeah, that's true. It's highly rational and irrational at the same time, just like some YouTube channels are so popular. Some YouTube channels are so good but not popular, just like me. The idea is the unit of content of the information, order, and in the idea, rationality and irrationality are juxtaposed in the highest tension. The point that the book has tried to make is that we can no longer step outside of the global communications flows to find a solid fulcrum for critique. So, if you want to critique, you have to be the one to be critiqued. You have to be inside of it as well. So if you want to criticize your parents, you have to become your family as well. There is no more outside. The critique of information is in the information itself. So I think this book is so perplex. So many things, just one word to answer it. But this book is written for stupid people. But it's written for stupid people to make so many explanations. But it is very hard to read. So although it has some genuine ideas, but I don't think it is so good. First, it's written for stupid people, but his writing is not easy to read. Just finished it. Bibliography. Okay, bye-bye.